Hi, we wanted to make a tutorial to help you edit the textures of your MetaHumans once you have downloaded them. This tutorial can be used for adding tattoos, scars, or whatever else that is residing in the superficial skin layers. This tutorial is meant for those who are 90% or more happy with what they can extract from the MetaHuman creator, but they still have specific art direction requests that would give their character a final touch and make it absolutely unique. In order to do this, you will need to have access to textures editing as well within software of your choice. Although you can already easily edit color maps provided within source materials in any image editing software, this is not the case with the normal maps. To have complete control of the normal maps, an artist would need to have a high poly sculpt of the character so they could sculpt anything they want on top of it. Once you have the base mesh from the rig and the displacement, you can reconstruct any character within ZBrush to have complete control. Once we are inside QuicksilverBridge, you can download your custom MetaHuman. For this tutorial, I'm going to use one of the MetaHuman presets. I chose the Sukja character as she is one of the oldest available within the presets. The reason I chose an older character rather than a younger one is the fact that wrinkly skin will be harder to reproduce accurately due to many landmarks on an older face. Young characters would not be as high a benchmark for this demonstration, and it is fair to assume that whatever works on wrinkle-rich characters will also work on the smooth ones. As you can see, I have already downloaded this character. There are a couple of options to keep in mind before exporting. Firstly, make sure you have the right resolution. Apart from that, you can select all the textures you might need in the download settings. Some of these, like the displacement map, are currently unavailable, but you don't need to worry about them for this tutorial. The next section in the download settings is dedicated to models, and here you can choose which source assets to download. Some of these settings are just preferred options, and again, you don't need to worry about them. For this demonstration, the most important of those would be the source Z tool. While we don't have the Z tool or displacement as source files, we can recreate them using normal maps and the base mesh. After downloading the character, make sure you have installed the appropriate plugin for exporting. I'm using Maya and the plugin is already installed, so I can just hit export to have a fully rigged character open in Maya. For the source files, the quickest way to access them is to right-click on the downloaded character in Bridge and select Go to Files from the drop-down menu. In the Explorer window, you can navigate to the Maps folder within Source Assets folder, where all the character-specific textures live. Inside the Maps folder, we will need color and normal head maps. Both sets contain 4 maps, 1 base or neutral map, and 3 animated maps. The first thing I'm going to demonstrate is editing on top of the color maps. This edit contains simple tattoos, and it is a straightforward edit as it does not involve editing of any other maps, since the tattoo information is present only in albedo or color. After loading the neutral head mesh in Mari, the next thing to do is to load all color maps as well. As you can see, these color maps have 2K resolution, even though we have checked 8K for export. As color maps do not contain high frequency information, we provide lower resolution for optimization. The normal maps, which do contain high frequency information, are indeed 8K, something you can see from the file size. Once I have imported and renamed all 4 color maps, I can start performing the edit. Here in the image manager, I have already prepared the alphas for the tattoos that I'm going to add to this character. I've picked a simple tribal design for the purpose of this tutorial. The reason for working in Mari is the need to have these designs displayed correctly without any skewing or stretching. This would be hard to do by working only in the UV space, as the UV is increasingly stretching further from the center of the face. To avoid that, I'm using projection in 3D space. This workflow assumes that any edit done on the base color is going to be applicable on the animated color maps as well, so I'm turning those off for the time being, and once I'm done, they are all going to be exported with the tattoo edit on in the top layer. Here I'm using flat color to simulate ink color. In the mask stack, I'm arranging the prepared alpha projections. Once I have projected the masks, I'm introducing a bit of blur to make it blend better and to simulate the look of aging ink that dissipates over decades, especially if they are done with traditional tools. Finally, I need to edit the blending mode and color to adjust the end result. Now that I am happy with the result, I'm going to re-export all color maps with this tattoo layer on. Having updated color maps with these tattoos, there is no reason not to test them right away, since this edit is independent of normal maps. I'm turning off selection highlighting for better visibility and bringing on hypershade to access the head shader. In the shader, I found the slot for base color labeled diffuse map, and I replaced the existing map with the one I just prepared. You can instantly see our change taking effect. However, this is not enough as this only influences the neutral expression, but as soon as we activate any other expression that has effect around these tattoos, you might notice the tattoos disappearing. This is because for any given expression, there is an adequate animated map activating, and that map also needs to have the change present in it. So after loading the animated maps, you can see everything working as expected. For the scar reference, I googled a couple of images, and this is the one I liked best for the purpose. In order to be time efficient, I'm not going to show the sculpt process of the scar. Instead, I already prepared it and I'm just going to save it as a 3D brush. Once we have the character ready, I'm just going to apply the scar on top and do small edits to blend it with the skin. Before we can move on to sculpt, we need first to generate displacement maps from provided normal maps. For that, I'm using Substance Designer as I find it to be the most efficient tool for the job. In Substance Designer, I have already imported the 4 normal maps as resources, and they are being used in the graph to be converted to height maps via normal to height HQ node. HQ stands for high quality, and we should be using the HQ version as it will give us more accurate pores and wrinkles reproduction. The settings are the same for all 4 nodes, and they are mostly default settings. The only thing differing from the default node settings is the quality option, which is switched from normal to high. If you wish to play with the settings, feel free to do so. For example, relief balance influences the contrast of the details. However, while testing, I have determined that the default settings give me the optimal outcome. When we have the height maps ready, I'm checking all 4 of them for export. In the destination folder, I can find these maps, which are going to be used in ZBrush for reconstruction. There is one disclaimer to be made regarding this process. As it is also stated in the Substance documentation, you can never get 100% accurate displacement from normal. Before I export the necessary OBJs from the rig, I will quickly adjust the shader so that the detail on the face is more prominent. You can play with the settings on your own, but for me, usually adjusting the specular and occlusion does the trick. For the low poly OBJs, I need to export at least 4 meshes, 1 neutral and 3 meshes corresponding to the animated maps. This image shows how the maps are arranged universally on every MetaHuman character. The WM1 map contains brow raise, blink, pucker, squint, chin raise, and jaw open. The WM2 map contains brow down, nose wrinkler, mouth, and neck stretch. Unlike the first map, where some expressions cannot be active simultaneously, WM2 map does not contain conflicting expressions. Likewise, the WM3 map contains only smile and cheek raise expressions, which usually get activated together, so there is no conflict there either. I have already animated the rig controls to form the exact expressions that I need. Here you can see what I mean by conflicting expressions. We can store brow raise, blink, and pucker in a single shape. But if I added jaw open or chin raise, they would influence the pucker. Squint would influence blink in a similar fashion, and these influences would look unnatural. This is why I have split WM1 expressions into 3 separate shapes. Depending on where the edit is going to be placed, we are only going to use the affected expressions. The WM2 and WM3 sets are stored in a single shape each, which is quite convenient. Now that all these shapes are prepared, we can go on and export them as OBJs. Here we have covered all possible scenarios, but if the edit you will be doing is small and more localized, for example only on the eyelid, then you would use only neutral and blink. Similarly, if the edit is just affecting forehead area, you would need neutral and 2 forehead expressions, brow raise and brow down. Here in ZBrush I have imported the neutral mesh and subdivided it 6 times. On a new layer, I'm applying the previously prepared displacement for the neutral. One thing that is a consequence of deriving displacement from the normal maps is the fact that we need to eyeball the intensity. As mentioned earlier, this conversion assumes a bit of data loss, since normal maps do not contain information about normal intensity, but only the normal direction. This is why we need to use our artistic judgment and reference images from the MetaHuman creator to get a closest match as possible. Now that we have recreated the character in ZBrush, the next step would be to do all intended editing on a new layer. In this case, I'm going to add a scar that I already prepared as a 3D brush. I'm adding the scar on a new layer while having the underlying skin layer turned off, so it doesn't interfere. Once I turn both layers on, I can use the morph brush to reveal or hide certain portions of it to blend it nicely. Finally, when I'm happy with the look of the edit on neutral, I can propagate the same edit to the animated expressions that I already exported. Judging by the placement of the scar and comparing it to the expression distribution on the animated maps, it will only partially affect the pucker expression from WM1, nose wrinkler, and slightly affect mouth stretch from WM2, and both expressions on the WM3 map. This means we need to use 3 of the exported OBJs, but not all of them, so I can disregard the squint, chin raise, and jaw open. Before updating the Z tool with the WM1 expression set, I am turning off all existing layers. Once I have imported the WM1 shape, I will be repeating the process for the neutral, only this time using the corresponding WM1 displacement map. Now we can just reuse the edit layers. To have the layers stack orderly and easy to manipulate, I duplicated the scar layers so that each WM set has its own associated layers in case it needs to be edited further still, depending on specific wrinkling beneath it. In the layer stack, I'm using caps lock for WM1, WM2, and WM3 sections for easier navigating, as they are meant to be active only one at a time with their associated layers. I'm repeating the same process 2 more times for WM2 and WM3, just as I did for WM1. I'm doing a bit of additional editing on the scar with the smile expression active, as scar tissue is sclerotic and thus behaving differently than ordinary skin, so I need to make it more persistent on the face, regardless of the heavy wrinkling that surrounds it. Although the quickest way to bake out these changes would be to do it directly in ZBrush, these normal maps would differ a bit from those in source materials, as the source maps have been baked in XNormal. The reason being is because ZBrush uses subdivision method, while XNormal uses raycast. To ensure best results, I suggest using XNormal or similar raycast baker. To prepare these sculpts for baking, we need to export them first as high poly mesh. As this process may take a long time given that each head has 24.5 million polygons, I sped up the process by isolating only the relevant portion of the sculpt where the change occurred. The process is repeated for the three expression shapes in the same manner it was done with the neutral. Once we have all high and low poly meshes prepared, it's time to feed them to XNormal for baking. In XNormal, aside from feeding the low and high poly meshes to it and specifying output path, we need to invert the green channel to -y, as this corresponds to DirectX. Since these baked maps contain only the scar area because we clipped most of the face in high poly mesh, I'm combining these bakes with the original texture in Photoshop using a mask. If we quickly compare the bake from ZBrush with the one from XNormal, you can see that the XNormal version looks much stronger. For that reason, the scar will be more readable in Maya. The normal maps are ready, but this scar change is still not reflected in the color maps. To do that quickly, I'm going to derive height and curvature from an updated normal map that now contains scar information in it. These two maps are both mostly gray, with value variation that can be utilized easily on top of color map by using different blending modes. Now I'm just putting these on top of a color map and isolating the scar area with a mask. For both of these layers, I came to conclusion that soft light blend mode works best. It already looks better, but it still lacks a little bit of a punch. To achieve this, I'm going to use the same normal map I used to derive these two, and I'm going to take one of its RGB channels to use in the same way. The red channel seems to have nice scar detail in it. After pasting it on top of everything with the same mask and soft light blend mode, I decided to take a bit more from it, so I duplicated it and changed the blend mode to color burn. After adjusting the opacity, I am happy with the color of the scar, so we can group all these layers together and just add the color maps beneath for export. I'm using the same scar color information as I don't expect the color to change much in animation, as this tissue usually has fairly poor blood flow. Now that all editing is done, we are updating color maps in the shader once more. Right away, you can see an updated shader with much more prominent scar on the cheek. This time around, it's enough to change the version as everything else is the same. So that would be it regarding map editing. Before we wrap the video, I have one final tip. All the edits we have done so far are contained within the color and normal maps exclusively. This means that the scar shape is limited by the normal map. If the edit is too large and changes the silhouette of the model, this will not be represented with the normal map. This workflow would be adequate for small interventions that do not require changing low poly mesh in the rig in order to be visible. But there is a sweet spot when it comes to the extent of the edits you can do in geometry before it starts influencing the rig in unpredictable ways. Since this scar does displace base mesh in the sculpt because it is a fairly large edit, there is a way of incorporating that too in the rig. The way to do that is to export the edited mesh from ZBrush at the lowest subdivision level and add it on top of the rig as a blend shape which will always be on. To do that, I need to find the blend shapes node in the rig and copy its name. Then select the exported mesh and the rig mesh respectively, and in the Deform drop-down menu in the Edit section, choose Blend Shape Add and check the context box. Then you need to specify a node and paste its name below. After you click Apply and Close, you will be able to find new blend shape added at the bottom of the stack. Turn it on, and now the change is applied globally. Since our mesh from ZBrush is reconstructed using displacement from normal, it may have some small vertex offsets throughout the entire mesh relative to the original in the rig. To eliminate this, you can just paint out all but the relevant scar area in this added blend shape. Or you can just prepare it in that way before you edit. If your specific edits are larger than this and require propagating them through multiple expression shapes with custom intervention on many of them, then this global one-size-fits-all solution would not be appropriate. In the end, to show and compare the results inside Unreal Engine, we have imported the original MetaHuman alongside her double with edited textures. This concludes the tutorial. Thank you for watching.